firstly, make sure you're completely transparent with regulators. They can smell crap from a mile away. So I would say, obviously in communication with your legal teams and PR teams, they're incredibly intelligent people.
Yeah.
So whatever they ask for, give, and try to be as explicit and easy, using lay people language when you're describing something that you might have done.
How do you become a leader in the privacy space? Use content and video to make privacy and the profession more accessible, and define a whole new type of privacy role. Today, on World Data Privacy Day, when we're releasing this episode, we are joined on the abstract by Ron DeJesus, the industry's first field chief privacy officer. He's the field CPO at Transcend, where he's leading Transcend's privacy advocacy and evangelism efforts. Before joining Transcend, Ron had his own privacy consulting firm, pretty cool, and spent time as the chief privacy officer at Grindr. He also spent about 5 years leading privacy for companies in the dating app industry beyond Grindr. He was at Match Group and their subsidiary Tinder. Ron has also worked in the fashion industry on privacy at Tapestry and their subsidiary Coach. And he spent a number of years sort of learning and growing in the privacy profession while at consulting firms, including Deloitte and PwC. Ron, thank you so much for joining me today for this episode of The Abstract.
Thank you, Tyler, for having me.
Okay, let's start maybe with like the present day, and then we can go back a little ways. Tell us about this super cool role as field chief privacy officer. What are you focused on? And I'm also like, I feel like you must be defining this as you go, right? Like, how did you and Transcend come up with this idea?
Yeah, first of all, I wake up every day looking in the mirror and basically thanking the gods that I have this incredible role in privacy. I definitely think it's one of the coolest roles in our industry in compliance. Um, and I'm not sure if you know, Tyler, but there has been this concept of a field CISO,
Hmm,
so Chief Information Security Officers, who have,
interesting.
they're established folks that have a lot of domain expertise. They are obviously ex CISOs,
Hmm.
who go out into the field and interact with potential clients and prospects and basically help, whatever third party or vendor that they're part of sell the software or the platform.
Yeah.
And so that really, it's a really cool concept because you have an individual who's walked the walk and talked the talk and is able to be in the customer's shoes.
Hmm.
Um, I wanted to start with that because although my role is the field CPO, I actually more focus on interaction with the privacy community and
Hmm.
building thought leadership, interviewing really prominent folks in the space, sitting on panels. So actually, I've been touted, or I've been tasked with focusing on evangelizing the product, but through interactions with the community. So I'm
Yeah.
not actually considered sales, which is great because I'm a terrible salesperson, first of all. I tell it like it is. But what's great about the role though, Tyler, is that, obviously it's such a unique role that I think Transcend had just the great foresight to go out and find an individual who has the expertise and the domain knowledge, but again wants them to focus more on developing not only thought leadership but just creating dialogue in our community. I think it's actually such a missed opportunity that we in this space deal day to day with breaches,
Hmm.
with different features and products that might implicate privacy, but a lot of that knowledge is siloed.
Hmm.
And so it's just been such a great kind of role for me because I get to talk to my peers and they want to talk to me as a former CPO. And
Sure.
and of course, if they are looking for a privacy platform, I can let them know that Transcend is obviously top of its game when it comes to privacy program management, and that does bleed into my work quite often. I'm on a couple of sales calls per quarter, and
Hmm.
obviously do focus on that aspect. But again, how we get the community talking and how we build that trust and rapport is through just speaking with my peers on a one-on-one level. So it's great. Anyway, it's yeah. It's just to answer your question. The role's unique. I love it, and I couldn't ask for a better team for sure. Yeah.
As I've watched you sort of grow into it after the announcement that you were hired, I've been learning. I mean, in some ways, I think that this like field CPO role, or I didn't know about field CISO, right, is actually kind of similar in some ways to community focused roles.
Yeah.
Um, what do you think? And you've spoken to it a little bit, but what do you think that really says about the importance of having the trust of an industry or the trust of potential customers? That the company or the vendor has actually gone out and brought someone in who really understands their needs and concerns and what truly matters to them, which might not always be the latest feature that the company's rolling out, as great as that is.
Yeah, no, I think that it should be table stakes for any privacy company or even just compliance software company, whatever it
Hmm.
is, to have someone in a role like this that is actually able to tell, internal product and engineer and the folks that are actually working on the platform that you're selling, hey, this is actually how it happens in real life.
Hmm.
I definitely think this expertise and this, again, the having that domain knowledge is absolutely critical, to any company that is trying to sell to a specific function or community. So if you don't have one yet, I just actually find it a little bit flabbergasting that I'm the first of its kind.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think but I do predict that in 2025 and beyond, we'll see a couple of companies mimicking this role, and I welcome that,
Hmm.
for sure. Yeah.
And you might even have recommendations for those folks.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things that I've really enjoyed that you've done in your role, these video series that you're creating, right? I mean, you're a great content creator. You're very creative. You do them with privacy leaders, regulators, even activists, right? You do one with Max Schrems that I found particularly interesting. Uh, what have those interactions or those conversations taught you about how regulators or activists think about privacy harms, think about privacy issues?
Yeah, such a great question, Tyler. The kind of the driver for me to develop field trips, and I came up with that name myself, by the way.
I love it.
Playing off the field CPO kind of
I
role.
came up with the abstract, so
Amazing, so creative. But my ultimate goal for that series was, to your point, to get varying perspectives on topics that CPOs deal with day to day. So, for example, my first two guests were folks from the EU Parliament who were really
Mhm,
critical to pushing out the EU AI Act. And then I had Max Schrems, who has that activism perspective. And then I had the head
mhm,
of CNIL, who obviously comes from a regulatory background. So my goal for field trips is to really get an understanding of how different dimensions of our industry think about these issues,
mhm.
because I come at it with a kind of practical, pragmatic, in the weeds lens,
Yeah.
and it's so interesting to hear how other folks view, the need for, let's just say again, the AI Act. One of my questions to those folks at those politicians that I spoke to who were involved in that kind of trialogue process was, where are you getting our perspectives? We're the ones as CPOs and privacy pros that have to deal with the resulting legislation, and it kind of created this really good dialogue around, well, we've considered some of the things, like, for example, they did consider GDPR and the need for data protection impact assessments
Mhm,
within the EU AI Act's kind of requirements when it comes to high risk um, AI models and systems. So for me, it's really getting a flavor and sense of different perspectives on the same topic to truly understand that kind of life cycle of how a law is generated and the impacts. And to Max Schrem's perspective, why is he kind of harping and focusing on these different tech companies that aren't complying with that law? So again, I think I really just wanted to get flavors of perspectives to bring forth just multitudes of perspectives and viewpoints, and share that with my peers in the community at large. So
I mean, I certainly appreciate, having earlier in my career done a lot of privacy work, the need to be very practical and apply these
yeah,
laws to whatever's happening day to day in your business. And of course, you're thinking about data subjects and you're thinking about harm and you're thinking about ethics, right? One of the things that's interesting about these videos is you're talking to folks that usually, if you're within a company, you don't necessarily want to be talking to, right? Like, you don't always want to be having the upfront conversation with the regulator or with an activist like Max Schrems. You're thinking more sort of like practically about the day to day. You might be a little bit more internally focused if you have a privacy program management role. Uh, are there things, knowing what you know now and having had some of these conversations, that maybe back when you were a CPO or you were working on privacy program management, you think, oh, might have done that a little bit differently, or oh, I wish that I'd engaged in this way? Just curious if this has affected how you think CPOs should be doing their day jobs in any way.
yeah, I definitely think it's been incredibly elucidating for me to get the perspectives of regulators, for example, and understanding what's on their roadmap, what's top of mind for them as a CPO, and being able to share that with the community. I hope that I brought to light some of the things that CPOs should be thinking about when they're developing
Hmm.
their programs. When the CNIL's coming out with a worksheet on getting the the specific legitimate or the legal basis for using personal data to train AI systems, for example.
Hmm.
Take that guidance and really implement it. It's there for a reason. There's such a wealth of resources that are out there. So yes, I think as I interview folks that are outside the operational field of privacy, it really does color how I would, if I was a CPO again, um, develop a program and you know implement controls to protect user privacy for sure. So
You were experimenting with video content creation before joining Transcend when you had a consulting practice. I have to think it's one of the things that got you on their radar. But I'm curious, what were you trying to accomplish with it at that point in time? There's not a lot of folks who are doing privacy video content out there.
yeah, I'd say it's a really low bar actually. So it's really easy for me to sweep in and kind of. I'm just kidding. I think there's a lot of great content creators out there in our space. For me, how I got into it was I was talking to my mom about something. I think it was like a privacy policy update, and this is a true story. And I was actually on vacation in Italy at the time. And that part will be important in a second. So she asked me, hey, should I click yes on this privacy policy update? I don't even know what it means. Can you tell me more about it? And I was walking her through, the purpose of a policy and how companies
Hmm.
typically collect her personal information against the backdrop of Lake Como, where I was at the time. And it just was an aha moment for me
Yeah.
to blend, like, because I like design, I like fashion, I like travel, and it's kind of a juxtaposition between that and compliance. So then I started this video series where I talked about just basic privacy rights of individuals against kind of really cool backdrops. And I
Hmm.
started working with a really great creative producer who's in fashion and design. And so we mixed these two seemingly really different themes, and started this video series to help the lay person better understand their privacy rights. And
Yeah.
that just it generated a lot of really great interest on LinkedIn, and that's when I started to think, hey, maybe there is a space for actual. I guess I wouldn't call it social
Hmm.
influencism, but like just better content creation, for compliance professionals. So
One of the
Yeah.
things that I love about that, I talked to other guests about this. I think people look at themselves or they look at compliance professionals or lawyers and they're like, we're not creative, right? And actually, like, you've just talked about how these other interests that you have, going to beautiful places, fashion, right, ended up being super important in your career journey in compliance. I think this is just underappreciated, basically, like that we are more creative than we think.
Yeah, and the biggest thing I learned, Tyler, was, yes, compliance can be fun and can be design focused, but what I learned through working with folks that are in social media was that it's actually best if you can blend the two, like your passion and maybe something that you want to educate the masses on. You
Yeah,
can actually have several dimensions of that that really, get people talking and eyes on a post. And I think that's the best way to approach something like privacy and compliance. That's typically, and I will say, boring. Let's be real. Talking about the GDPR is not the most exciting thing, but maybe talking about the GDPR plus looking at a really great, scene in Greece might
yeah,
might make it more consumable, right? So yeah,
totally. People should take notes if they're thinking about their trainings for their sales teams,
exactly,
for their marketing teams.
absolutely.
I do want to spend a little bit of time asking you about your time at Grindr and if in the dating app space more broadly. When you joined Grindr, you were stepping into a sort of situation, as I think happens to other privacy pros as well, where the company was being fined by the Norwegian DPA around some data sharing practices. My question for you there is, do you have advice for folks who may be stepping into a role where they may need to do some cleanup, or they might need to try to make decisions to restore the reputation of the business? Yeah.
Yeah, first of all, my time at Grindr was incredibly interesting. I think I learned
Mhm.
such a huge amount of stuff during that time, and it was great because at the same time I was at the helm of protecting the privacy of millions of users of a
Mhm.
community of which I'm part, which to
Mhm.
me, as a privacy professional, it really felt that I was actually doing something altruistic and something that really affected my community.
Yeah.
So
Uh-huh.
I had the I had a really great time in that role. Um, I would say my advice to folks that are coming into situation where they might have to clean house is really make sure that you get the partnership and the level of support that you need from executive teams that you're working with. I think having
Mhm.
that top down message from the CEO, or from the board or whoever it is that you're reporting to is
Mhm.
absolutely critical, because nobody's going to listen to you unless you have that sense of, this is a top priority for this company. So I think, again,
Mhm.
number one, get 5 minutes with the CEO and let him know what your MO is and how you want to affect change. Um, so another thing I would say is also, I think a lot of this is also cultural too. It's gonna take time to change behaviors.
Sure.
People aren't going to know what their privacy responsibilities are overnight.
Yeah.
So developing really good behaviors is going to take time, and I think that's something that folks that are coming into situations like this have to realize, that it's not going to be an overnight change, and they have to work at it, whether it's through really good privacy training, having really good messaging at regular intervals, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
So again, top kind of executive level support, and then doing things that change the culture from within, are really critical. So
That's really fantastic advice. And I think that the both parts of that are applicable to any sort of compliance challenges that you might be dealing with, not just with privacy.
yep.
it being an internal comms battle sometimes too that you need to fight. I'm also curious, sort of related question there. I mean, I think that when you're working in privacy, I mean, of course, there are ethical lines or there are legal lines that you have to uphold or you have to communicate across the business. But a lot of success that I've seen in privacy is with folks who are really good at the comm side as well, or really good at stakeholder management as well. And that doesn't mean, by the way, that you are doing something that is wrong or not 100% compliant and making it sound really good, right? What I'm saying is the work that you're doing behind the scenes also needs to contribute probably to a narrative that builds trust with those stakeholders. You've worked in the dating app space, which is B2C, a lot of focus and visibility on this. Any lessons that you learned while you were in that space around managing privacy comms that you'd want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, and if we're focusing on privacy comms when shit hits the fan, there's a couple of things that I could share with you, Tyler. Is firstly, make sure you're completely transparent with regulators. They can smell crap from a mile away. So I would say, obviously in communication with your legal teams and PR teams, make sure that you are, they're incredibly intelligent people. So
Yeah.
whatever they ask for, give, and try to be as explicit and easy, using lay people language when you're describing something that you might have done, right? So again,
Sure.
kind of number one tip is when working with regulators, just be as transparent as possible. I think my second tip would be have accountability. If you've done something wrong,
Mm-hmm.
working with your comms teams around not creating fluffy language about what may have happened, but take responsibility for your actions. And I feel like consumers really respond well to companies that say, hey, we made a mistake and here's what we're
Mm-hmm.
doing to rectify and mitigate any risk to you. I think that really resonates well with consumers, especially when we have a lot of examples where companies try to kind of push off the responsibility to a vendor or whatever it is, but like
Yes.
aren't really taking responsibility for something that they could have done in hindsight. So again, um, I think those would be my top two tips if you're stepping into a minefield. Yeah.
And you, as the company, signed the contract with the vendor anyway. So,
Right. They don't care about vendor X
yeah.
that you're using. They see
Yeah.
you as
Yeah.
that first point of contact. So yeah.
When you left Grinder, and I mean, look, this is all in the public record. Let's say the departure wasn't mutual. You alleged wrongful termination for speaking out about some privacy practices. I don't want to ask you all about that. What I am curious to ask you about is how you managed through what must have been a very difficult and stressful time, right? And then had the fortitude to get back out there and build this consulting business in a pretty public way, which led you to where you are now. How did you navigate that experience personally and professionally?
Yeah, Tyler, I'm not gonna lie. It was incredibly difficult both professionally and personally. But it gave me pause to look back on my career and really invest some time into thinking in what's next, right? So I spoke
Mm-hmm.
to not only my peers and folks in privacy. I started to really get the perspectives of folks in the creative field, in other industries that I was interested in, and really do a kind of a mapping of the skills that I was good at, that
Yeah.
the different dimensions of myself in terms of, I'm really good at design and fashion and I love traveling. What can I kind of do next, but also still leverage everything that I've learned in my 15 years in privacy. So it was a
Mm-hmm.
really watershed moment for me. And I think the way that I'm the type of person that needs to be doing something at every minute and every day, right? So even my husband was like, take a beat and just have some time to relax. But for me, again, I really focused on not just looking at potential next privacy career moves,
Hmm.
but what else out there was I good at, and could I possibly be leveraging my existing skill set? And that led to your point, the developing of these videos, which I also think launched my career at Transcend as well. So again, I would just say to the folks that might be in similar situations, perseverance is key,
Hmm.
um, and solicit as much perspective as you can get, and I think those were really good guidance points for me. So
That's
yeah,
great advice.
yeah, thank you.
Um, One of the things that came out of your time in the dating app space, I think this is a really interesting idea, is thinking about swiping as a sort of different model for a consent framework. Was it in Fast Company? I
Yeah, a
recently read your
couple
op-ed
weeks ago. Yeah.
a couple weeks ago. Tell us about this idea. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think this was just something that came to mind when I was thinking about just-in-time notices, that
Mhm.
the pop-ups that you might get when an app might be collecting sensitive personal information. And I was thinking about things that we do day to day and that we take for granted, whether it's, again, you know, swiping on a dating app, or clicking on Google Maps, or, just these day-to-day gestures that we do every day. Why can't privacy controls be as easy as that? So it was just, it was just a kind of a thought experiment on what if companies took advantage of those controls, existing kind of UX controls,
Hmm.
um, and use that to better, the experience for users when it came to their privacy choices. So I thought it was just like a cute little article that, again, since I was in the dating app space, folks could relate to, but again, I think I just wanted to generate a broader discussion on how companies can better operationalize privacy choices for users.
Hmm.
So that was the whole goal of that article.
And let's be honest, right? I mean, there are some instances, maybe like Apple's only allow while using the app location controls prompt that work, I think, pretty well. We can also think about like cookie consent banners, right? Other sort of consent frameworks, excuse me, that do not work well at all. And so I don't know, putting a slightly different mind to it or spin on it or thinking about it let's think about this from a UX perspective, not just from a
Exactly.
compliance perspective, right? Like that's also what's really interesting to me about your idea.
And I think that if companies started to think with that mindset, they would get a lot out of consumers. I think consumers would be more trustful of the
Yeah,
services and products that you put out if you are putting privacy front and center. And I think I talk about Apple as an example quite often as well. I think they've done an incredible job at using privacy, not only from a monetization perspective, but from an
sure.
optics and reputation perspective, right? We do see privacy as the privacy first company, if you will. And I've seen huge billboards of this in San Francisco, for example. But again, I think if companies started to capitalize on that, you'd see a lot more data sharing and maybe a lot more consumers comfortable with providing with data, versus if you engage in what's called dark patterns or burying
Sure.
things in terms and privacy policies. It's eventually going to come to light that you might be doing something nefarious with their data. So just be transparent and user friendly, and I think things will fall into place. So
Let's switch gears a little bit. Like a lot of folks, your path into privacy wasn't entirely on purpose. Yeah, tell us how you got into privacy.
yeah, I definitely did not grow up saying, "Mom, I want to be a privacy professional." I definitely not. It was a not a linear path at all. I actually studied to become a doctor, but realized that I was terrible at math and science. So I actually pivoted into English Lit, which actually led me to consulting after I graduated university, for a healthcare systems consulting firm, um, and started actually doing assessments on these systems as well from a
Hmm.
privacy perspective. And this was all based in Toronto, and I'm
Huh.
sure you know, Tyler, like Canada has a pretty mature uh, privacy legislation kind of environment. So I
Hmm.
was dealing with, this was back in, let's say, 2005, 2006. I was doing privacy impact assessments kind of straight out of university. Yeah. Which I was really good at. I'm actually really good at kind of like, unearthing gaps, but
Yeah.
also coming up with mitigation strategies. So again, started in a really boutique consulting firm. Then I moved to the big four, so Deloitte,
Mhm.
where I was exposed to some really great clients globally, doing privacy maturity assessments, operationalizing privacy programs. And then to your point, I was a former head of privacy at Tapestry, which owns Coach and several other fashion
Mhm.
brands. They actually asked me after an assessment that I did for them to become that head of privacy. So it was like a perfect kind of way to end that engagement. So that was my
Yeah.
first in-house role. Um, and then after developing my own program, I wanted to actually focus in tech. And this was the year before GDPR went into effect, and Tinder was looking for its first ever privacy role, which
Uh-huh.
I pounced on. I wanted to not just, you know, say to teams, go and delete personal information. I actually wanted to understand from an engineering perspective, how do we actually do that? And
Mhm.
so working at Tinder was my first foray into working with product folks, with engineers, with folks that have a very specific mindset around things, which was great. It was really great for me. It was actually the best time in my career from a educational perspective, because working with
Mhm.
engineers, they're a different animal. Um,
Yeah.
and again, I actually should start with the fact that I'm not a lawyer, but I've
Yes.
reported to GCs my entire career. So I've always been within the legal function, liaising with, my GC or head of legal and the folks that
Mhm.
are on the ground actually trying to operationalize things like data minimization and data subject rights requests, right? Um, so did a couple years at Tinder and Match Group, went and did my own consulting for a bit, but when I was doing my own consulting, I actually met at the time the head of legal for Grindr at a really small privacy event, and he then wanted me to come in and do some in-house work, and I eventually became their data protection officer and then eventually their CPO. So pro tip, go to as many networking events and small privacy knowledge nets that you can. You never know who you'll meet. Yeah, and then after Grinder, did my own thing again, and then now I'm at Transcend as their field CPO. But I actually, Tyler, I should point out, I don't do any internal compliance work, which
Sure.
is great. Like I've done that, been there, done that. We have a great head of legal who I adore and admire, but I get to focus now on just content creation and really just connecting with the community. So
You mentioned you don't have a law degree. It's something that we have in common. Although I think that probably, like me, people assume that you're a lawyer from time to time. Do you think that chief privacy officers or people in privacy need law degrees? Like, how do you answer that question?
I would say absolutely not. You do not need a law degree to be a privacy professional. But I will caveat that with it really depends on what the organization is looking for. There's no one size fits all when it comes to what they might need in terms of a privacy role.
Hmm.
So for example, if you have a company that is a pretty, is a small to medium sized company that needs a head of legal, they also might, naturally fit the CPO description as well, right? So that
Hmm.
company might be putting out a requisition for this person needs to have a JD. So I understand certain cultural and other factors that might play into why a company is seeking someone with a law degree. But again, as someone that comes from a more audit and kind of, I guess, English background, I think
Hmm.
there's multiple skill sets that can help a privacy office, whether you're looking for privacy engineers or folks that handle specific features, from a privacy product perspective.
Hmm.
Um, those can come from a plethora of backgrounds. So again, I'm not saying that. Actually, I love being called a lawyer. It makes me feel smart. Makes me feel like I'm actually, interpreting laws correctly. But you do not need to have a law degree. But I highly, encourage folks that come from different backgrounds to seek privacy roles if they want. Yeah, for sure.
I think you may have been quoted even in one of these articles. The Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg have published some articles sort of about like, is the CPO role going away? And I think that this is spurred, of course, by the rise of AI and thinking about AI governance. And is this going to subsume the chief privacy officer role? Is the chief privacy officer really just like another person under the GC? I don't know. What do you think about that? Right? Like, do you think CPO roles are going to change and evolve a lot? Where does AI fit in? What's going to happen to these roles and the titles?
Yeah, I actually wrote an article called "Is the CPO role dead?" or something like that, and it actually I saw that there was like some folks on LinkedIn that basically just read the headline and were in big disagreement with that, which
Yeah.
was not the point of the article. It was actually trying to shine a light on our profession as something that is never going to go away. But anyway, I do you remember, Tyler, back in the day when there was this term big data, right? And then chief
Sure.
data officers became a thing.
Yeah.
Like, do
I
you?
worked for one for a while, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I definitely think that as technologies evolve, roles will evolve. And to your point, we're now being the ones tasked with this concept of AI governance, which I think as CPOs, we're probably the most suited to address. A lot of the time we do have to think about not only about consumer privacy, but about the ethics of doing something, right? When it comes to pushing out a feature, I'm always thinking about risk to individuals broadly and not just to privacy. So I think,
Mhm.
yes, we're now given this hat, this additional hat that we have to wear, but I think it makes sense as CPOs to wear it. Um, but to answer your question, I definitely don't think our role is ever going to die off, if you will. I definitely think our roles and responsibilities will evolve and change over time. But I'm actually really happy that uh, we're thought of as the folks that are the best suited to address AI governance and considerations with this emerging technology. Um, it's not only great job security, but it just also makes sense from a skill set perspective
Mhm.
too. So
I'm sure you get asked all the time from folks on the other end of the, not CPOs, on the other end of the spectrum. Young people want to break into privacy, whether they're out of undergrad, maybe they have another role in the business and they want to try their hand at it, or they've gone to law school. What's your advice to those folks? Maybe besides go to random IAPP networking events.
I think there's multiple pathways into this profession, and I think my advice to young folks that are getting into this field are to reach again for us. And I'm sure you know this, Tyler, but LinkedIn is such an incredible resource. Whether it's
Yes.
just finding people, I've actually had a few students reach out to me just randomly on LinkedIn, wanting 5 minutes of my time. I'm
Yeah.
happy to give that. So use LinkedIn to your advantage and just reach out to the folks that you admire or the folks or the roles that you
Mhm.
you find interesting. If you're looking at a specific role, do some research on to see who's the hiring manager and send a
Mhm.
note. So again, we have this professional network for a reason. And I think the second tip would be, there's lots of certifications out there that you're seeing on job requisitions as now required. So for example, the ones that are put out by the IPP. There's an abundance of certifications to get out there that are out there that you can get that are privacy specific. So think about doing those as well to just add to your resume. I think
Mhm.
they're it's kind of a no brainer if you want to get into this space. demonstrate your appetite and your desire to do that by getting really educated and demonstrating that through certifications. I think is a good way to start as well. So
Absolutely. I mean,
yeah,
nobody's going to be hiring a chief privacy officer because they're a SIP US or they're a SIP Europe. But
right,
if you're right out of law school and you decide that you want to go and practice privacy law, or you want to even do privacy program management, you know, nobody knows what classes you took, but they can see that you've gone and, been willing to sit down and study for 12 hours or whatever it is
exactly,
to get the SIP certification, right? It's a very easy way to use your words, demonstrate interest. I think.
absolutely. You know, and anybody off the street can take these certifications.
Yes,
There's no
even us.
professional, yeah, even us. But there's no like professional or educational requirements to take these certs, which I think some folks in the industry have issue with, and I completely understand that. But I think getting a cert at least demonstrates a baseline interest, and
Yeah.
again, a level of determination.
Hmm.
If I'm looking at a CV from someone that's applying and they have a SIP US and someone else doesn't, will they have a
Hmm.
leg up? Probably, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah. So
I've got some fun questions for you in just a sec,
okay.
but before we get to that, if folks want to find your content, get connected with you, where should they look?
Yeah, on Instagram you could follow me at Ron DeJesus. And on LinkedIn, just search for me by name, Ron DeJesus, and you'll see my title there as the industry's first field CPO. So yeah, and LinkedIn is my primary kind of source of content. So yeah, I'm happy to connect there.
Cool. Okay, a few fun questions for you. First one is, what's your favorite part of your day to day?
My favorite part of my day to day is I actually it's funny, I'm a big introvert, but when it comes to
Interesting.
yeah, it's weird, but I love just talking with people and interviewing them on my series. I have two series,
Huh?
actually field trips and then another kind of cute fun one called On Trend with Transcend, where I ask privacy pros kind of rapid fire questions that are
Yeah,
both top of mind for privacy pros, but also you know cute things about themselves too. So I yeah, my favorite part is just engaging with the community, I'd say.
Do you have a professional pet peeve?
Oh, yeah. Where do I start? No, I think for me, I love Slack.
Mhm.
I love it as a communication tool, but I definitely think there are times when it's better to just pick up the phone, because intent and things like that can definitely be misconstrued. So I
Yes,
think my pet peeve is like if something's feeling like it should be a conversation, have a conversation. So
that's a really good one.
yeah,
That might be the best one I've heard this year. I totally agree
really,
with
yeah,
that.
nice.
Do you have a book that you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah. So actually, believe it or not, I have it on my coffee table here. I
Oh,
could show
look at
it
that.
here. Yeah, it's called Atlas of AI by
Interesting.
Kate
I haven't heard of that.
Crawford. Yeah, it's a super interesting book that doesn't really get into the technical know-how of AI systems and models. It more focuses on other impacts caused by AI. So for
Hmm.
example, the effects on the environment, on the workers that actually are doing a lot of the tagging and kind of the manual labor and the
Mhm,
impact on those populations. So it looks at it from these dimensions that you wouldn't really necessarily think of when you're in compliance, which I like
mhm,
because we're so heavily focused on, what's the next emerging regulation on this. But there's such a plethora of impacts above and beyond just compliance that we don't really think about. So I think, yeah, it's a really good read just to get a sense of other other industries that are going to be affected by the rise of this tech. So yeah,
that's great.
yeah.
Um, okay, my final question for you. Traditional closing question for all the guests on the abstract. It's if you could look back on your days of being a young privacy professional just getting started, what is one thing that you know now that you wish that you'd known back then?
Yeah, I would say just try different things every day. It's just we tend to be so focused on our day to day as privacy pros, and I think in my early career I was just so hyper focused on privacy as a profession that I just wish that I probably did other things to supplement more.
Mhm.
And I'm 42 years old, and there I wish I had, for example, focused more on refining my proficiency with the French language, for example. So it's like, so it's just looking at things that like hobbies and other things that
Mhm.
can supplement your career. Focus on that. Give time, and I think currently we use the term hold space for
Yeah.
hold some space for things that you enjoy in life, and just have a really good balance between um, work and play. I think would be my 2 cents there.
And I think as your career has demonstrated to us, those hobbies, those things that you love outside of work can come back and inform it in surprising and unexpected ways.
What a good way to wrap, Tyler. That is such a yeah. I agree. I agree.
Um, Ron, thank you so much for joining me for this episode of The Abstract. This has been a lot of fun.
This is so much fun, Tyler. Thank you so much.
And to all of our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time.